Welcome to the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast. We're going to continue this House Axis series for this last episode now. In the previous two, we covered the 5th and the 11th. Now we're going to do the 6th and the 12th. And Robert has asked that I leave my chart up as we record this, so you'll find that in the show notes, and he has something up his sleeve. I don't know what, but we're getting ready to find out. Robert?
Well, I don't know about something up my sleeve, but we're talking about the 6th, 12th axis, and I think it's fitting that this is the last one that we're doing because my approach to the 6th house, I have a book over on Amazon that's called The 6th House of Psychological Self-Integration, and that's what I mean by this house. To me, it's frankly the first place I look in a horoscope. I don't care what the sun sign, the moon sign, the ascendant are. I want to know, how does a person integrate themselves psychologically and physiologically? The 6th house is the house of health, and that's a very thumbnail sketch for what this house really is. This is the house that precedes the 7th house, and from the 7th through the 12th, those houses are all above the horizon line. They're in the public sphere. The houses below the ascendant-descendant horizon are the private sphere. So the 6th house is where, and think about it, in the natural wheel, it begins with 0 Aries. The 6th house is ruled by Virgo. So the 6th house, yes, it symbolizes health, but I'm talking about psychological, spiritual, and physical health. The 6th house is the mind-body-spirit connection. And so much in your life depends on this house. So you can look at this house and pretty quickly determine, does this person put themselves together, integrate themselves harmoniously and healthily or not? So for example, Thomas's chart here, you instantly see Mercury and Jupiter in Sagittarius in his house of psychological self-integration, mind, body, spirit. Jupiter's at its home sign here in Sagittarius. So no matter what is going on in Thomas's life, no matter how challenging it may be, because he's a Scorpio and will have them and have the drama, his psychological self-integration is Mercury and Jupiter conjunct in Sagittarius. So it's easy to say he's an optimist by nature, but he is. And Jupiter, as we know, co-rules not just Sagittarius, but also Pisces. It's an incredibly spiritual and religious sign, but it's spiritual. So Thomas's entire mode of psychological self-integration, mind, body, spirit, is basically one journey after another, one adventure after another. Mercury and Jupiter in Sag, the sign of long-distance travel. That means not just geographically, but internally and philosophically. So he is a philosopher by nature, a preacher, if you will, a minister, and that can be of a religion or it can be of a metaphysical or even overarching world concept that he's communicating, Mercury and Jupiter. So his whole psychological self-integration is always one of hope and optimism and excitement about what's next around the bend. So in this sense, Thomas's life from day one has been to outgrow wherever he is. Thomas is getting ready to make a cross-country move. That's a huge move for him. It's to reorient his entire life, basically from the East Coast to the West Coast. So topographically and geographically and atmospherically and sociologically and culturally and everything is about to change. This is a beautiful new adventure for him. It's one of the most exciting things he can do in his life, but his life, his mind, his body, his spirit, with Mercury and Jupiter in the 6th house of health and work, are geared toward this expectancy and living in the future. It's look how much I have learned. Sagittarius, Jupiter, Mercury, how much I have learned. Where can I take this, or where is it taking me? So his whole orientation toward life is to get out and get on and move as far from his origins as he can. And this is the story of his life in a lot of ways. So the sixth house tells you about health as well. So no matter, and with Scorpio on Thomas's sixth house, he doesn't get sick often, but when he does, or when he has a health condition, it is likely to be fairly serious, something he has to pay attention to. But even then, he will tend to get good medical treatment. And not only that, his psychology is geared toward healing. Scorpio is one of the signs of healing. Jupiter is one of the signs of healing, and doctors and physicians, ruling Sagittarius and Pisces, Pisces of hospitals and health and clinics and so on. So Thomas is a natural healer, and his whole life is a process of healing and moving on and moving higher and moving up and knowing more and sharing more, communicating more with the sixth house. So if you think about the sixth house as psychological self-integration, or ease or dis-ease, dis-ease. That's really what the sixth house shows. The sixth house is in an inconjunct, a 150-degree aspect to the first house of the physical body. And so is the eighth house. So those two houses, the sixth and the eighth, because they inconjunct the ascendant, are both rulers of health in astrology. The inconjunct aspect is an aspect of health. It's an aspect of dis-ease. In other words, perceived frustration. And frustration is meant to motivate you to resolve the frustration. In a physical illness, the illness itself is a manifestation of an internal organic frustration that is meant to be consciously addressed and healed. That's all it is to heal it. And with Thomas, his whole life is about healing perceived stresses, in other words. So his work is very much tied in with Mercury and Jupiter and Sagittarius, which is all about communications and travel and philosophy and broadcasting, which is what he's done all of his life. And through those things, this is one thing that keeps him healthy, mentally, spiritually, and physically, is the communication and sharing of his own philosophical understanding and growth throughout his life. So that's why it's easy to say as a thumbnail, he's an optimist. He expects the best. He may worry a lot because Pluto squares those two planets in his sixth house of health. He may have some anxiety at different times of his life about his health. He may even have some serious health issues with Pluto squaring the Jupiter and Mercury, but he heals them. And they're meant for him to comprehend and apprehend and heal. So with Mercury and Jupiter in his sixth house of health, whatever his health conditions may or may not be over a lifetime, he will tend to get good treatment and respond well to treatment. So his whole life is geared toward improving his health, mentally, spiritually, philosophically, all of those areas. The 12th house opposite the 6th is the same thing, but it's on a collective level. So the 12th house is the social equivalent of health. Personal health is the 6th house. Collective health is the 12th house. And so look how astrology illustrates the connection through Virgo and Pisces, the natural 6th house, 12th house rulers. Integrates health with work and occupation. If you are in a job that is unhealthy or stressful, it's going to affect you physiologically. If you're in a job that is satisfying to you and fulfilling to you, which Thomas is, he's got Mercury and Jupiter there. He will always, always find work, find an occupational sphere that fulfills him or has the hope and potential of fulfilling him. I mean, he certainly has found that in what he does for a living all these many years. And that alone, the satisfactory and fulfilling work also reverberates in terms of his physiological health. It heals him to do this kind of work. So does that make sense, Thomas, about this integration between psychological self-integration and physiological self-integration and work? Because that's the real message of these two houses. I think they're among the most important. They're all important.
Well,
But
obviously,
this one particularly.
Yeah. Yes, and you wrote the book on it, which you mentioned is on Amazon. It's also on hightimelinebooks.com, which you'll get a PDF download, and that's our website. So if you'd like to support us directly without feeding Jeff Bezos's rocket programs, come over to High Timeline Books, and you can get it there as well. So we have another paradox here. We talked about this in the last episode when we talked about the fifth house. But the paradox is that Jupiter is in the sign that it rules. Mercury, however, is in Sagittarius, and because it rules Gemini, it is in detriment there. So talk about that contrast.
Well, it's interesting with detriment. It is a valid concept in astrology, but you have to work with what you've got and what you're born with. So it's Jupiter, Mercury in Jupiter, the challenge to that. Mercury rules Gemini and Virgo, both of which are concerned with details and organization and prioritization. Mercury and Jupiter in Sagittarius. Mercury is in the sign opposite one of the signs that rules Gemini. Gemini is preoccupied with the details of things. Mercury in Sagittarius is preoccupied with the much larger scope of things. So the reason it's in detriment is that it can fail, unless it's conscious, it can fail to pay attention to the detail work. It's so much concerned with the bigger picture, the bigger message it's trying to get out, the broader message, the more collective message, that now this is not necessarily true for Thomas, but Mercury in Sagittarius can have really big ideas, especially connected with Jupiter, but fail to manifest them because it doesn't pay attention to due diligence, to little detail work. And so now this is not particularly true of Thomas. He's got Pluto in Virgo in his third house, which forces him to pay attention to the details, especially the technological details of broadcasting, all of the equipment and so on that's necessary. But by nature, that Mercury in Sag conjunct Jupiter in Sag will tend to be full of really big ideas, and it will be frustrated because it keeps feeling like I'm not reaching my potential. I'm not living up to what I can see in my head I should be reaching. I can't reach the audience, the big audience that I want to. I'm not able to express as completely the big ideas and philosophical understanding that I have as I want to. This is not, again, necessarily true for Thomas. It may have been earlier, but as he gets older, especially the squares, thank God for them. People who don't have hard aspects have a rough time in life. The hard aspects are meant to challenge you and frustrate you so that you are motivated to do something about them, to take actions to resolve them, and through taking the actions, you grow. Soft aspects are states of being. And people get very comfortable living on almost no money or living on welfare or whatever. And so they don't do anything to lift themselves up because, it's okay the way it is. But with Pluto squaring that Mercury and Jupiter, things are never okay ideologically with Thomas, because the more he learns, the more he knows he needs to learn, because he keeps seeing deeper and more and broader. And he wants to communicate and share all that with him. So he lives in a constant mental state with Pluto in the third house of obsessing with getting this message as clean and clear and broadcast to as many people as he can, because it's done so much for him in his life and his understanding of life, which is very deep with that Pluto square. If this is making any sense.
It is. And
all of this really affects your health.
Mm-hmm.
Your physiological health, because these are mutable squares, which is basically the nervous system. So Thomas can live, and Pluto is a very unconscious planet as a rule, archetype, unless you have personal planets aspecting it, which Thomas does. But he can live in a constant state of anxiety and internal mental pressure about it. So he's got so many details involved in the work that he does that he can get very tense and create nervous stress, which can reflect in the body.
Let's talk about the 12th for a second. And I'd like to ask you to shed a positive light on it because the 12th just has such a bad rap, especially from the more ancient type interpretations, that it's like this just shadowy, dark, dank house. And yet, we know it's sitting opposite, as you said, of the house of self-integration, so it can't be all that bad.
This is such a great point. You know, the old books classified the 12th house as the house of secret sorrow and self-undoing, and it is. And astrology exists, thank God, to help us get conscious about the 12th house and the rest of our lives. People forget the 12th house not only rules secret sorrow and self-undoing according to its ruler, in this case Taurus, and the aspects made to that ruler. The 12th house also rules hidden support, buried treasure. So understanding your 12th house, particularly through astrology and psychology, understanding that 12th house really turns out to be the buried treasure in your life. Now, I go back to my chart, sometimes talk about being raised by alcoholics, which I was, and I love to drink. And sure enough, my 12th house is my secret sorrow and self-undoing. Well, when I understood what drinking and alcoholism and all of that is about, namely escapism, suddenly I was able to heal myself, heal that condition, and it became my buried treasure. The same is true in your chart. And one of the things that you can look at your 12th house and see, it's a collective house, remember, is Taurus on the cusp, which is ruled by Venus. Venus is in Virgo. Very interesting sign for Venus. And it's the work sign, the occupational sign. So early on, you are raised in a very Pentecostal, very rigid kind of religious background and thought about becoming a minister and did for, I think, a while, which is very much Venus in Virgo. And that could have been your secret sorrow and self-undoing if you had stayed there, if that was it, if you wound up parroting what the elders said without thinking about it or without criticizing it or examining it, all of that critically, you could have become another Joel Osteen, let's say. But you didn't, because it wasn't enough. And you perceived, because of this stellium that you have involving Neptune, seeing through the veil, that there was something much more important beneath the traditional Taurus, the traditional Venus and Virgo, the traditional kind of philosophical and occupational niche that you were following. And as you outgrew that, it actually became the hidden treasure that underlies your life. Once you discovered metaphysics and spirituality that is common to all of us and all religions, that took you out of what could have become a very rigid and limited kind of work and occupational experience, and you would have been sicker, physically sicker in your life. You outgrew that through the Mercury-Jupiter conjunction that you have in your 6th house. So you outgrew the rigidity of and the conservatism and the limitations of the 12th house that you were born into and expanded that to where you are today. And that is your hidden. If you had not been raised in that environment that you were, you wouldn't have any comparison to make. You wouldn't have been challenged to either stay there and conform and parrot what preachers have said long before you and not have found and discovered your own originality and your own direct connection with spirituality and with God and with metaphysics and a way to communicate those buried treasures, which you have found and have turned into the cornerstone of your life. So that 12th house, it does rule institutions, things like hospitals where we go to be cured, to regain and restore our health. It rules prisons where people who are a danger to society have to be isolated for the good of society. So that's why that house rules those things as well. because hospitals and prisons are very necessary on two ends of the spectrum. Hospitals to help us heal or to have serious surgery and so on that restores health to more serious conditions, or to isolate people who are a danger to society, criminals, rapists, child molesters, all of those things. They have to be put somewhere where they are not free to infect or inflict their own psychoses on society. So that's why this house rules those institutions, if you will. On the positive side, the 12th house can also rule other kinds of institutions, many kinds. So it does rule hospitals and clinics. The 6th house also happens to rule the armed services. Opposite that is the 12th house, which is also related to the three branches in the United States, the Army, the Navy, the Air Force, and so on. So the understanding of the 6th house and 12th house is, again, personal versus collective. The 6th house is your personal attitude and understanding and psychological self-integration and physiological self-integration. So, for example, in Thomas's chart, for his own physical and mental well-being, Mercury and Jupiter in Sagittarius means get out there and walk, travel, exercise, but walk. So I know how much Thomas loves living where he does right now in the mountains and hiking through the mountains. And sometimes he'll send me beautiful pictures of what's going on in the Smokies where he lives now, which are magnificent. But those are also very good for his health, not just his physical health, his psychological and spiritual health as well, because he really will feel close to God when he's out there in nature. And this will be true. He's beginning to relocate across the country to the West Coast. The same thing will be true there. It's a different experience, but it's still getting out in nature for Thomas and walking puts him in connection with the all that is, or God, which is great. Don't know if this is making any sense. I hope so.
No, excellent. I don't want to hammer a point too hard here, but you mentioned Venus ruling Taurus, and it is actually in fall in Virgo, where it is. So here's a planet ruling the 12th in fall. And I know a lot of people have this, and we did an episode on it just a couple back where we addressed this in more detail. So for people who have a planet in detriment or fall in one of these axis points, whether they have planets in there or not, but you're looking at this kind of structure, does that slant that interpretation in some kind of way?
Yes, it does. I also have planets in detriment and fall, and they are meant to give you trouble. Venus is out of whack in Virgo. It's exalted in Pisces, for example. So why is it out of whack, Venus in Virgo? Because it's constantly analyzing and criticizing everything, especially having to do with Venus, namely love and marriage and money. So the critical nature of Venus in Virgo, it's actually, Virgo is one of the old signs in astrology known as the bachelor and bachelorette sign. Venus in Virgo will very often have issues involving intimacy, namely day-to-day, 24/7, 365 intimacy, because it really loves its work. It loves Virgo more than it loves being in a relationship. And that's hard for people to understand sometimes. It's great if you've got a partner, a wife, or a husband who is also involved in his or her work, equally dedicated to it, so that they're spending a lot of time and focus on their work, just like you are spending a lot of time and focus on yours. But in relationships, you've got two people who are equally obsessed over their work and focused on those things. And in many cases, the relationship, consciously or unconsciously, takes second place to their career efforts. So that's the only reason Venus is considered to be in its detriment in Virgo. It is not a sign of emotional intimacy on a day-to-day basis, because it is much more involved in its work. Or on the negative side, its lack of work, because you have people who have trouble holding a job, let's say, or identifying what they want to do for a living. They can have Venus in Virgo too, and in which case they are preoccupied with, why can't I ever find satisfaction and fulfillment through my work? And that becomes a dominant factor that can absolutely interfere with relationships. So you might explore, with Venus ruling your 12th house, how that Venus in Virgo in the third house and this really almost obsession with your work. It's in the same sign with Pluto of obsessive compulsive behavior. We all have Pluto somewhere. But it's the love of your work that really is what you love. And everything else kind of comes second to that. And it may sound harsh to say, well, you mean even more important than a wife and children? Yes, in a sense, yes. Sometimes you can harmonize that. Sometimes a person can't harmonize that. So they wind up having divorces. And it took me forever I have a completely different chart. But that's also the truth for me in my life. I love my work more than anything. I didn't know that until I was almost 50, even with astrology, but it's true. So this is one of the reasons it's considered to be in detriment. However, Venus in Virgo is also protective in terms of health matters, because Venus in Virgo will tend to naturally have an interest in its own health. Sometimes it's forced to have an interest in its health because it does have a health condition that's relatively serious that it has to pay attention to. But even when they don't have that, they will tend to take an interest in their own nutrition and exercise and the people that they hang around. They want to avoid toxic people and toxic situations because they know it's bad for them. So it can actually be a very healthy kind of preoccupation. So there are always two sides to everything, even with planets in fall or detriment. There's a message there that you're meant to pay attention to. So in a way, if you explore these things through astrology, you can kind of get clear on, oh, I see now why it's considered in detriment, because it is true. I really do love my work, and it takes up the bulk of my time and the bulk of my interests. And so be it. That's the way it is.
Wow, you just bring a chart alive so much. I really appreciate it. Love listening to your teaching, and it's amazing how this chart is so stacked with information that just allows us to see a map of our soul's journey and our reason for being here. Thank you so much. This has been a great series. And everything that we have going on in the podcast, including Robert's link for readings, if you'd like some of this for your own self, are in the show notes. And we'll see you next time on the Old Soul, New Soul Astrology Podcast with Robert Glasscock.